you're welcome again to Collavare Work Series. This podcast is focused on exploring the interesting world of work. This is our first episode in 2023, and so you are welcome. My name is Ziika, and I facilitate this podcast. I think we had the intro and pilot episode last year, and we talked about, I had Azeez with me. Azeez is here again, as always. Okay, in the intro episode and the pilot episode, Azeez had given us a lot of insights on, how the 5-day work week best practice happens in Nigeria, and whether it is detrimental or helps productivity. I think you should listen to the full episode for more understanding of that. I also think that I think it was split into two parts. In the second part, we also talked about adopting contextual practices as opposed to the best practice, for better productivity in the workplace. But like I said earlier, you can listen to the full episode on Google Podcast, on Deezer, on Stitcher, on Apple Podcast, and follow Collavare Creativity Series on Instagram and LinkedIn as well. Okay, so for those of you wondering, I know Collavare Creativity Series. What is Collavare Work Series about? We know that we spend a significant part of our lives at work, and for a lot of people, work defines them and gives them identity. So Collavare Work Series is here to explore the origin of work, the foundational concepts and practices as we know it today, and we'll also look at what the future of work holds for us. So you're welcome again. Azeez, you're welcome to the first episode in 2023.
Thank you. How are you doing?
Very well. Okay, so what are we looking at today?
I spent a lot of time watching football. So what we'll try and do as the European football season comes to an end, for me, it's become evident that we can learn valuable insights that are applicable to the workplace. So we'll be dedicating 3 episodes to exploring the connection between football and the workplace. By exploring these connections, we aim to provide our listeners with fresh perspective and insight that can enhance their professional lives.
Okay, so I like the way you bring things that people enjoy and infuse it into, you make us learn from it, basically. Yeah. Okay, so you said we'll be splitting this into 3 episodes. So for this episode, what will be the focus?
For this episode, we'll be looking at a football club called Napoli. They're based in Italy, and they had a fantastic season in 22 to 2023 season. So for Napoli, it wasn't just that they achieved a lot, but it was the manner in which they achieved it. So what we'll try and do throughout this episode, we will look closely at the factors that contributed to their success.
Okay, so what's so special about them? What did they do in this season?
From a performance perspective, they achieved a lot. They won the Italian Football League, first time in 33 years.
Wow.
The last time they won it, Diego Maradona was playing for Napoli.
Wow, that's a long time.
Yeah, and they also go to the quarterfinals of the Champions Cup. Like I said, it's more than what they achieved, but how they achieved it. So I would highlight some of what they did. This was a club that reduced its wage bill by 30% from the previous season. This was a club that sold 4 of its best players.
Wow.
This was a club that not only scored lots of goals, but they played beautifully. In fact, some people claim that they were the most exciting team in Europe for the 2022-2023 season. Now, in the Italian league, they scored the most goals and conceded the least goals.
Wow.
In the Champions Cup, as at the quarterfinal stage, that's at the stage that they left, they had scored the most goals in the Champions League. Now, what was also extraordinary about Napoli was that when you compare their overall budget with other clubs in Italy and in Europe, their budget was meager at best. So this was a club that, for me, I felt they were punching above their weight category. but they achieved a lot despite that. And that really was motivation for me to uncover the secret behind their success and discover what formula that we can learn from them and also apply in the workplace.
If they had their first win after 33 years, definitely there's something that they did differently or some things they did differently. Now I'm very curious. So what did you discover regarding their success?
3 things.
Okay.
The first one, I think Napoli embodies coherence in action. And I will explain what this means. See, people assume that the starting point for success for a football club starts on the pitch. No, it starts off the pitch.
Yeah.
Napoli's success on the football pitch can be attributed to their effective management and strong alignment within the management team. Now, for a football club, when you talk about management, there are 3 rules that determines how that club is managed. The first rule is that of the owner or president or general manager. Depends on the club structure. So the owner or the president is the person that's in charge of the entire club that determines what happens. So that's the first person. Second person is the coach or the football manager. Football manager is focused on what happens on the pitch, tactics, those sort of things. And the third person is the director of football or technical director or sporting director. Different clubs, different countries use different titles, but basically this is the person that's in charge of recruitment, recruitment of not just the players but also even the coach as well. So it's like somebody who looks out for strategy, aligning the president's view to that of the coach. Now, these 3 roles collectively contribute to the effective management of a football club, allowing for a cohesive decision-making process and successful operation on and off the pitch.
Okay, please, I think you should explain further.
Now, for us to understand why these rules were key for Napoli, we need to understand the people who were behind these rules.
Okay.
So, Aurelio De Laurentiis is the owner of Napoli.
Okay.
Now, he bought Napoli in 2004 after the club went bankrupt. And this is very important. His primary objective for the club was to achieve financial stability, not to win trophies. It's important. Remember what we are talking about is coherence.
Yes.
Okay, so his main aim was to achieve financial
stability.
Now, the second person is Luciano Spalletti, who's the coach or who was the coach of Napoli. He recently resigned. Now, he is known for his preference in building teams where the collective strength surpasses individual star power. So he's very comfortable working with unknown players. The third person, who's the director of football, Cristiano Giuntoli, specializes in identifying promising talent and acquiring them at a reasonable price. Now, when you look at Spalletti and Giuntoli philosophy, it aligns very well with that of De Laurentiis, whose main objective for the club is financial stability. Now, that's one. Secondly, you also have to understand what Napoli represents in Italy. Napoli is situated in the southern part of Italy. Italy has like 2 parts, northern and the more prosperous part, and the poorer southern part. Napoli is from the southern part. So Napoli thrives in being like a maverick. You understand? They like to challenge the norm. Now, when you look at both De Laurentiis and Spalletti, they embody that maverick personality. That David versus Goliath mentality. You understand? So Spalletti and De Laurentiis, they embody that mentality, which is aligned with the mentality of Napoli as a city.
Okay, so before we become football analysts, do you want to explain to us how does this apply to the workplace?
Beautiful question. Now, the success of companies hinges on their ability to effectively execute their strategies. Now, a robust strategy encompasses 3 key elements. The first one is clear long-term goals. By this, you mean that what are the specific objectives that provide a sense of direction and purpose? So you must have goals as a company. Now, so let's go back to Napoli. For Napoli, their main objective from a long-term perspective was for financial stability. Secondly, De Laurentiis wanted the club to return to Europe within 10 years. As at the time he bought Napoli was in Serie C. Serie C is the third tier of Italian football. This was the club that was once a champion, and they were now in Serie C. So by the time he bought the club, he wanted them to return to European competition in 10 years and possibly win the Scudetto in 20 years. So those were his long-term objectives. So the first part of a strategy is clear long-term goals. Second part of a strategy is well-defined course of action. So this is saying, I have clear goals, but what steps would I take to ensure that I achieve those clear goals? If we go back to Napoli is a selling club. Now, the reason why Napoli sells its players, the best players, is because its main long-term goal is what? Financial stability. So you can see coherence between the actions and the long-term goals and the course of action. So the reason they sold 4 of their best players was because for Napoli, being financially stable was of paramount importance. And that's why some of their key players are going to leave again after this season. Now, the third part of a strategy is proper resource allocation. By this we mean you have to begin to allocate resources to achieve your goals. And that's why, again, I would say for Napoli, the first priority was financial stability before winning trophies. So they allocated resources to align to what their goals were. Now, coherence plays a vital role in effective strategic execution. By coherence, I mean this. I mean there must be an alignment between the company's actions, goals, and available resources. In the context of Napoli, their status as a well-run club can be attributed to the presence of coherence within their operations. So their goals, their line of action, and their allocation of resources were all aligned. The people they had running the club had the same philosophy with the owner of the club. So they were a coherent organization. Now, many organizations struggle to achieve their desired outcomes due to a lack of coherence. When actions are not aligned with goals or resources, it hampers overall performance. Even if the organization has talented employees, in such cases, there is always a disconnect between strategy and execution. And that's why you find several companies struggle. Not because they don't have the resources, not because they don't have talent, not because they don't have vision, but because the vision, the resources, and the talent they have, they are not coherent, they are not aligned.
So why do you think it's so hard to actually achieve coherence?
Very good question. And this is my view. I think for individuals and for companies, I think sometimes we are not honest with ourselves. And I'll use an example. I call this the Usain Bolt example. Now, Usain Bolt is built to run sprints. That's why he did very well in 100 meters, 200 meters, and at times 400 meters. That's why he's configured, he's built to run sprints. Now, but let's assume that the marathon was the most lucrative and the most famous race during his time. So what people usually do and what companies usually do, they'll say, you know what, even though I'm built to run sprints,
you should.
But because marathon is the most lucrative and the most, it will bring me fame.
Yeah.
I will train to become a marathon runner. And what happens is that some people will call consultants and they will say, you know what, design a strategy for me that makes me the best marathon runner in the world. They will give you the strategy, but you are not designed to run marathon. So you would struggle because there is a lack of alignment between what you are trying to achieve and what you are designed to achieve. And that's why I find a lot of individuals and companies as well. They are designed, they are structured to do some things, but they believe that they should be doing something else. So they try to force themselves into doing what they are not designed for. They are not coherent, they are not strategic, and therefore they do not achieve what they should be achieving.
Can I ask a question?
Please go ahead.
So how do you balance maybe the season you're in as a workplace, maybe you've existed for a while, you had a goal or maybe something you perceived you are supposed to achieve, but the season, times and seasons change. This is the expectation of this type of company. How do you align those two? Do you understand what
I understand, and it's a very good question. A good strategy is not cast in stone.
Okay.
A good strategy should be adaptable. Now, what happens is that you must be willing to adjust your strategy to fit the reality of your context. Now, that does not mean you change who you are. It means you adjust who you are to achieve what you can achieve. But the point I think the reason why I think the strategy seems difficult is because from the onset, several companies are not honest with what they can achieve. What they want to achieve is determined by what they think is lucrative and what is important. You understand? Not what they think that they are structured to achieve. So if you go back to Napoli, the coach was honest, the owner was honest with himself.
Financial stability.
Based on the resources that he had, he could not win the Italian league in the first 2-3 years. He needed time because it was a club that didn't have resources. So they were honest with themselves. And that determined who they had as a coach, who they had as a director of football. And over a 17 to 19 year period, they eventually won the Scudetto. Because they were honest with who they were.
If they were trying to win at that time, it might have not been possible.
They might win and they might go bust the next year. And that's what happens a lot with companies, you understand? Because they are trying to force themselves to achieve something that they are not structurally designed to achieve.
Thank you for that insight. I think you mentioned that there are 3 reasons for their success, and you've explained one of it to us. Would you like to?
Okay. So the second one, Napoli is structured for agility, or put differently, they are structured to be creative. Now, as humans, we constantly navigate the delicate balance between freedom and rules when it comes to creativity. When we are faced with too many rules, we feel restricted and not creative. Conversely, when we are faced with freedom, it can be perplexing and you really don't know what to do because you have too much freedom. So you must strike a balance between rules and freedom. Nathaniel Nixon, I think you remember her.
Yes.
We had her in 2021.
Yeah.
She highlighted that the interplay between expansive thinking, which she called wonder, and deep dive focus, which she referred to as rigor, is the core of creativity. So for you to be creative, that interplay between rules and freedom is how you become creative. Now, this is where the beauty of Napoli playing style emerges from. The team's ability to effortlessly pass and move the ball is a spectacle to behold. Now, this credit must go to the coach, Luciano Spalletti, and his simple philosophy of attack the space left by your opponents. It wasn't as if Napoli didn't have a football pattern. They had a football pattern, but they also had a philosophy, and it was very simple. It was, for the players, they were to attack the spaces left by their opponents. Now, so instead of adhering to an external rule, which was the pattern, the players were allowed to self-interpret that philosophy, and that made them to be very creative.
Okay, so what can companies or individuals, what can we learn from this?
Now, for a lot of companies, there's a tendency to have rules, rules of when to resume, when to close, when to stand up, there are rules for everything in companies.
When to go on break.
Exactly. However, what I think we truly need from the Napoli example are guiding philosophies that employees can embrace and adjust to autonomously without external influence. And I think Netflix serves as an example in this regard. With Netflix, rather than impose rules to every aspect of their operations, they empower their employees to make decisions based on the company guiding philosophies. Now, there are hindrances to this as well. It's good that we highlight this. Operating from a philosophical standpoint poses the challenge of finding the right individuals that can work in such a context. And that places a lot of demand in hiring the right people. I'll use, again, the Netflix example just to highlight this point. Netflix does not have a leave policy. So if you work in Netflix, there's nothing that says you must go and live 30 days of the year. You're allowed to choose when to go and live. I mean, I've had this discussion with people, and people say, "Oh, it
will lead to lawlessness.
It won't work.
Or
It will
something.
lead to lawlessness." And this is my response. Tika, do you have a sleep policy?
No.
So what determines when you sleep and when you wake up?
When I have to, when I'm tired.
That's my point. You are an adult.
Yeah.
You know when to sleep and when to wake up. Why don't we treat employees as adults and allow them decide when to go on leave, when they are tired, and when to resume? They have deliverables for the year. If you take too many days out and
and you can't deliver,
you will not be able to deliver. You understand? If you do not go on leave, you'll be tired. So again, this is from that mentality of allow people to take decisions that they are responsible for. And I'll cite a second example. Joe Dumas, I listened to a podcast that he was on recently, and he said something that I found very interesting. Joe Dumas was one of the leaders of the Detroit Pistons team that won the NBA title 89 and 1990. Very good basketballer. And he said when he was growing up, his parents never had a time for them to sleep, but they had a time for them to wake up.
That's very smart.
Very smart. And he said they were responsible for when they slept. And because of that, they took responsibility for the entire process. So they owned the process. And that's really what we want employees to do. We want them to own the process. So rather than stifle people with a lot of rules, let them understand the philosophy, let them understand the principles, and allow them make responsible decisions.
Very interesting. Okay, because of time, I think we should move to the third point.
Now, for the third point, Napoli believes that the superiority of the team over the individual. For them, the collective strength of the team is more important than the individual. They are a team that thrives on the collective performance of its players. Now, remember I said at the beginning that Napoli lost 4 of its best players. And it seemed as if losing 4 of his best players made them become a better team. And I'll explain why that was the case. Now, tactically, Spalletti plays a system that emphasizes on selflessness and responsiveness among the players. So it requires that players not only have the football skills, but they also are humble and they put the team's need above individual recognition. Now, these qualities are not always inherent in players who have experienced fame and adoration. Now, so the presence of these high-profile players, my thought, was preventing Napoli from fully expressing what they could, because you had players who were big, who had fame, who would want to do things their way. But by the time these players left Napoli and you had a bunch of hungry young players, they were willing to adopt the pattern of Luciano Spalletti. So when those players left, Napoli became a better team because the players who were left fully adjusted to the pattern that Spalletti was offering the team.
So how do we apply this to companies?
It's very simple. I think companies should be willing to let go of superstars that might be disrupting team performance. One of the most underrated characteristics for me for success in the workplace is humility. And I think that is not emphasized enough at all. It's not. I mean, we celebrate people who do very well. We celebrate people who are mavericks, people who are, talented. But I think humility is what allows a team to function very well.
It has been a very interesting episode. And like I said, I appreciate the the fusion of football and how it applies to the workplace. So let me just summarize what I think I heard. The three major points of learnings from Napoli as a football club. I think the first thing you mentioned is coherence of goal, line of action, resource allocation. There just has to be that coherence, and that's the first thing that makes every other thing easier to work with. Second thing is reduction of excessive rules and encouraging structured freedom.
Yeah.
And
I like that term, structured freedom.
Yeah, structured freedom, so that we're avoiding lawlessness. I think this would really help. Like you said, we have adults in the workplace, not children, and it would boost creativity, which in turn productivity. And the third point is superiority of the team over individual, which might mean you have to lay off superstars in quotes and encourage
when they are disrupting
if they become detrimental to the workplace, yes, because of fame or whatsoever. But if they're still willing to play by your terms, fine. But at the end of the day, people who want the development and growth of the team as opposed to individual, I think these three factors are the highlights from this episode. Azeez, do you have any final words?
I think learning is very interesting. If you open your mind to it, you can learn from anything.
Yeah, very true. From Napoli as a football club. I think it's been an interesting episode, and like we said, we're exploring the world of work. And for everyone who works, whether you're an employer, an employee, a manager, an entrepreneur, this definitely would help and boost productivity in what you do. Thank you very much, Azeez, again for this, and we'll be coming to a close on this note. Like Azeez mentioned in the beginning, the next 3 episodes will be focused on
insights from the European season that just ended.
Exactly. So stay tuned for the next 2 episodes and what we have coming. As always, the podcast is produced and edited by Joshua Praise, and the music is an original from Justo Christos, and our poster is being designed by Faith Folari and Joseph Okafor. Don't forget, continue to have a creative week.